we're going to talk about foreign keys. Let's remind you, everybody, what a foreign key is. If you remember, I'm going to go back to our classic example, which exists in our sample database. And let's look at some tables there. The employees table. So let me just do a select. We're going to select everything from the employees table. And we can see in here that each employee has a department ID, or most of them do. One person does not. Has a department ID, and this is a column that we added in the process of converting from our ERD into our physical database. We had to model that relationship. So the relationship, we put in the department ID on this table that points to the primary key on the adjoining table. Departments. Okay, I'm just going to run both of these. Okay, so we can see here Stephen King is in department 90, and that department 90 points to the relationship between the tables. Department 90 down here is the executive department. And we can see who the manager is, because the manager is person number 100, which is also happens to be Stephen King. Interesting. So the foreign key normally points to the primary key of another table. In this case, the foreign key for the employee's department ID points to the department ID of the departments table. And this establishes our relationships. Some things you should remember. And I'll type these on the screen. Okay. A foreign key does not have to be linked to a primary key in another table. You could use it to define a reference to any unique column. Okay, so the primary key is always unique. So in general, we tend to use the primary key. But it is possible to actually do a foreign key that links to any unique column in another table. Foreign key values have to exist in the reference column. That's part of referential integrity, which we talked about a few videos ago, right? Referential integrity. I don't want to put department 60 in here for Alex Hunold if there's no matching department 60 here. We would lose referential integrity in our database. So our database will enforce that rule. If we establish these foreign key constraints, it will enforce that rule for us. Okay. Likewise, we could have a problem if we tried to delete department 60 from our departments table while we still have people over here that have that foreign key in them. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about how we handle that too. So I'm going to do an example. All right. In this example, we're going to create a table and define a foreign key constraint on the column temp ID that references a column in the sales reason ID of the sales.sales reason table. We'll see that here in a second. Then we'll talk about on delete cascade and on update cascade, which solves a couple problems if somebody tries to do things like delete a department. Let's go ahead and create. We're going to switch to our other database. We're going to be working in our AdventureWorks database. So the first way I'm going to show you to do this is establishing the foreign key when you create the table. So we're going to do a create table statement, which we've done before. And I'm going to fill in a few other things that we haven't done. So create table. We're going to create it in sales, and we're going to call it temp sales reason. Okay, so we're just creating a temporary table here to do an example. Okay. And when we create a table, we have to list its columns. So we're going to do one column that's going to be called temp ID. And that's going to hold nvarchar for its type. And excuse me, should have known better. It's going to be an int, and we'll make it not null. We don't have to do that because of something else we're doing coming up, but I'll go ahead and make it not null, because it's going to end up being our primary key. You'll see that in a minute. We'll do another column called name, and this will be the nvarchar type. Now let's define some constraints. So we'll type the keyword constraint here. We've used this before. So let's create a primary key constraint. We'll call it temp sales. It's going to be a primary key. And I'm going to go ahead and add something else because we didn't do this in the indexing video. I can actually specify that I want this to be a non-clustered key. And we're going to base this on the temp ID column. Okay. So I can use clustered or non-clustered on a column to create an index at the very same time that I'm creating the table. Okay. Remember, by default, primary key would be a clustered index. So I'll be interested to see how this one comes out, since I'm telling it to make it a primary key but make it non-clustered. All right, so temp ID column is going to be the primary key. It's also going to be a non-clustered index on that column. All right, so now let's do our foreign key. So that's another constraint. And this foreign key, we'll give it a name. And a good way to name these is to name the two tables that it's establishing the relationship to. Okay, so we're drawing a relationship between the temp sales table and the sales reason table. If we can go find that down here. Sales.sales reason, there it is. Okay, so we're creating a relationship between these two tables. So that's a good thing to use in the name. And the constraint is going to be a foreign key. These are keywords, so I should capitalize them all, and I will correct it. Is that a good example for you? We're going to also use the temp ID as the foreign key. And then we have to tell, okay, this column temp ID in this table is going to point to, so we're going to say it references the sales, that sales reason table. We already knew that because that's how we named our key, right? From the temp sales table to the sales reason table. If I could type accurately. And in that sales reason table, it's going to point to the primary key, which is sales reason ID. Remember, so this column of of the temp sales table is going to point to this column in the sales reason table. So, created a table with two columns, created a primary key constraint, and then the real part that we wanted to talk about today, we created this foreign key constraint pointing from this table's temp ID column to this other table, sales reason ID column. I'm going to add a couple statements that we can talk about. On delete cascade and on update cascade. What do these two things do? Okay. What does it mean to cascade? Water cascades down a waterfall, right? So what happens if somebody deletes something involved in this relationship? Okay. So if somebody deletes Department 60, if we come back to our example we did previously, if somebody would delete the IT department, what would happen to these people that had 60 here? We can't leave 60 in those columns. So basically what it says, if somebody deletes Department 60, is automatically going to delete the department ID from these people. And hopefully those columns are not set to not null. Okay. What if somebody changes Department 60 and calls it Department 65? They update that value. Okay. On update, somebody updates this, it will also update all the people that have that department ID. So if I change this department ID to 65 in this table, it will automatically update these. So those are two important things to have if you want that action to happen. Okay. If you don't want people to delete a department, you wouldn't use that on delete cascade. Okay. That way nobody could delete a department until all the people are out of it. Okay. In this case, if they delete department, it's going to leave a bunch of people without being assigned to any department. If we don't want that to happen, we don't include this statement, then the system will not let us delete this IT department unless we go reassign all these people to another department. Once nobody is pointing at that, then it would let us delete that row. So that's the end of our I believe I need a parenthesis there. Take my notes with that. Let's execute it, see what happens. It says the command completed successfully. We have a sales.temp sales reason table now. To see it, I might have to go up to my tables and hit refresh. Sales dot did I not hit refresh? Sales dot, there it is down here, sales.temp sales reason. I was looking up in the other ones that started with a T. And we can see the two columns we created, temp ID and name. Notice temp ID is marked as a primary key and a foreign key. Okay. It's also marked as not null, which is automatic with the primary key. We have a couple keys we created, the primary key, which we created here with this part, and then the foreign key relating these two tables together, which we created here. Okay. How about if the table already exists and we want to create a relationship? To demonstrate that, I'm going to do the same thing, but first I'm going to get rid of this foreign key relationship. Let's see if I can get rid of that. I could do that with code too, but I'm just going to kill it right away quickly. And let's do another statement. We're going to alter table. So this is how we do it on an existing table. And it's going to be the sales. That sales reason table. Actually, we called it temp sales. And we're just going to put add constraint. And everything about this is going to be the same as it was before. Okay. We give it a name. We tell it what column we want to use on this table and what column it references on the other table. So if you notice, the two things, create table and alter table, once it comes to actually creating the constraint, the only difference is alter table and add. And everything else about that syntax is exactly the same. So I'm going to highlight that and execute it. And if we come back over here to our keys and hit refresh, we'll see that it's back again. All right, I'm going to stop this video and do another one where I'm going to show you how to do this with the graphical user interface.